Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the Oh No Sports YouTube channel. Today, I am bringing you yet another tier list. It is actually a continuation of last week's episode where I ranked every single projected SEC starting quarterback. We don't know quite yet, so these are just my best guesses at who will start for these teams. This week, it is, of course, the Big Ten, and we have a lot of players, as you can see here. 18 different teams, more than 18 quarterbacks, because some of these guys are neck and neck in terms of who I think the starter will be. Obviously on this tier list, elite, the best of the best, borderline probably Heisman contender level players in this category. Great, just a step below, maybe all conference, but probably not Heisman candidates. Good, you definitely have some flaws, but you're not a detriment to your team. You're still a very viable option at quarterback. And then mid, you have more than a few flaws. You're probably not going to help your team succeed. And if your team is good, probably not your help in doing so. And with that explanation, let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with Illinois' brand new starting quarterback, Katin Houser from Eastern Carolina and formerly of Michigan State prior to Eastern Carolina. 26 career starts, started all of last season at Eastern Carolina. In his career, 6,500 total yards, 58 touchdowns, and this guy is definitely a system quarterback, but that is not a bad thing. Like I talked about in the last episode, you can be a system quarterback and still be very, very good and have very good production numbers on top of that. The past couple of years, we've seen a bit of a resurgence in the spread RPO game, and that's once again where this quarterback, Katin Houser, falls under in terms of systems where he has succeeded. And that system has taken teams like Indiana to a national championship, so there's no ill intent meant in my words when saying you're a system quarterback. And with that system, Illinois has been very good the past couple of years with Luke Altmaier at the helm. I think he's more than an adequate replacement for Altmaier at Illinois, but in terms of just ability as a quarterback, not an elite arm talent, not an elite athlete, although I would say he's a better playmaker outside of the pocket with his legs than he is with his arm. So overall, I'm going to have to go mid. I think he can transcend that and become good just based on the system he's going into at Illinois. But overall, as a player, not super excited. Definitely think Illinois can be a solid team overall, maybe 7 or 8 wins. But like I said, definitely going to have more so to do with that defense and the system around Houser rather than Houser himself. And after that, who do we have but Indiana's new starting quarterback, Josh Hoover, formerly of TCU. He has 31 career starts, one of the most in all of this transfer portal class. This is yet another elite get at quarterback for Curt Cignetti. He has been on quite a roll at identifying quarterback talent, so I think Josh Hoover is easily going to slot in one of these roles once again. I think he's closer overall as a player to Curtis Rourke from 2024 than he is Fernando Mendoza of last year. Not super mobile as a quarterback, wouldn't consider him an elite athlete, but as a pure pocket passer, I think he is one of the more polished quarterbacks overall, like I said, in this transfer cycle. Very good at reading defenses, albeit fairly interception prone as a quarterback. 24 interceptions in the past 2 years at TCU. For what he's been at TCU, I struggle to put him at great, but entering this Indiana system that I think is going to highlight all of his biggest successes so far as a quarterback, I think he takes a step up. I have Josh Hoover as our first great quarterback of this video. And moving on to Iowa, who is known for their great quarterback play, it is Jeremy Hecklinski. There's a few guys actually on this roster who could get the start, but I'm leaning towards Jeremy Hecklinski just because that's the name a lot of people have been hearing out of that camp so far this offseason. Entering his redshirt sophomore year at Iowa, wasn't an elite prospect out of high school, won't be asked to be elite in any real way other than maybe with his legs as a quarterback. This is not a system that is very quarterback friendly to say the least. Last year we saw Mark Gronowski was pretty solid. I might have had him in good if he was able to return this year, but I think Iowa dips back down with an inexperienced guy in Hecklinski. I am having him as our second mid quarterback. Not a lot of potential for him in that system to take off and be an elite passer, maybe more so in the RPO game, but again, usually for a lot of these quarterbacks, I say the sky's the limit, but definitely not at Iowa, definitely not Ryan Hecklinski. And after him, we have another very interesting quarterback already in this video. It is Malik Washington of Maryland. Maryland. Obviously an elite prospect out of high school, formerly a top 10 quarterback in the 2025 high school recruiting class. Started all 12 games for Maryland last season and looked pretty good while doing it, albeit very inconsistent, pretty inaccurate overall. But what can you expect from a true freshman starting quarterback in the Big Ten? And despite those inconsistencies, over 3,200 total yards, 20 touchdowns at quarterback. And I say this one is interesting specifically because I don't know how confident I am in this Maryland system with Mike Locksley. I know a few years ago they had Talia Tungavailoa, who was pretty solid in that system, but it was more so the volume they gave him rather than him developing as an elite quarterback overall. Not sure what that means for Malik Washington. I don't know if he'll take a next step. I assume he will just because he's an elite talent, but I don't know if he's going to get to that upper echelon of quarterbacks. Hopefully he can do good things at Maryland. I think he will be great for that offense. Very dynamic quarterback overall, good arm, decent processing. Like I said, lacks a little bit in accuracy and decision making. And if Maryland really limits his ability to blossom into the quarterback that I think he can be, I think he will make one of the best quarterback prospects in the transfer portal next season. And after him, we have quite the name here in, I believe, Alisio Milivojevic and Cam Fancher, formerly of UCF. I think Fancher's a pretty underrated pickup for Pat Fitzgerald in his first season at Michigan State, just because he does have a lot of starts in his career, 28 to be exact, at 3 different schools now. As we've seen the past few seasons, getting quarterbacks in who have a lot of experience starting in football games at any level is very, very important, but it also matters what kind of system they go into. Cam Fancher hasn't looked amazing so far in his career, but just having a guy like that in the room will probably end up making it better. But as for the other guy in the room, I will just call him Alisio. He's been at Michigan State 2 years now. I know they bring in a whole new staff, so the system's taking a bit of an overhaul, but he is at least familiar with the program, familiar with a lot of his teammates there. So I expect him to get the start out of spring camp. Last season in 2025, just 4 starts, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, so not terrible. Of the two, Alisio is probably the better passer. Fancher is probably the better athlete, and you could see packages for both of them in this season. I'm not writing either of these guys off just yet, but I don't think either of them are going to wow us this season. And with that, they are going to be our third mid quarterback, I guess, combination of this video. And after him, it is none other than Bryce Underwood. One of the biggest stories last offseason, he flips from LSU to Michigan. This year had his ups and downs, but once again, he's another true freshman elite talent coming straight out of high school and starting in the Big Ten. Absolutely an elite athlete, but as a passer has a bit to work on so far. I think he does have an elite arm, needs polishing, needs work in the accuracy and play processing department for sure. But in my opinion, the biggest factor for Bryce Underwood is what exactly he will look like in a Kyle Whittingham offense. And if you're wondering, just take a look back to last season at Utah. They had Devin Dampier, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. Same kind of skill set, same kind of build as a quarterback, and that makes me very excited because if you know Devin Dampier, he was very, very good, very dangerous player, one of the most valuable players on that Utah team overall. That makes me very, very excited for him overall, and I am actually willing to put him in great just because how well I think he will develop under Kyle Whittingham in that offense. I think he could be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten next year. And after him, it is an underrated guy in my opinion in Minnesota's Drake Lindsey. Started all 13 games as a redshirt freshman for the Golden Gophers last year, and he led a solid Minnesota team to 8 wins. Now, did not look anywhere close to elite in doing it, just 64% passing, 2,300 yards, and 18 touchdowns. Those are obviously not Heisman numbers, but Minnesota's not going to ask him to be a Heisman caliber quarterback. So for what it's worth, he did his job very well to get them in positions to win football games, and on top of that, I think he is a very underrated arm talent. He has a pretty big arm, as we saw at times this year, although sparingly. I think he can be a very effective passer. We've seen his efficiency numbers rise when given volume. So for Drake Lindsey, I think if he was in a more quarterback friendly, more quarterback volume offense, he could have very, very good numbers, but probably not so in the Minnesota offense. I think he could be a borderline great passer, but definitely not a great athlete or playmaker out of the backfield. I'm going to put him in good just off of that passing ability alone. And after him, we have another quarterback duo. This time it is of Nebraska, Anthony Calandria, the transfer from UNLV, versus TJ Lateef, the starter for the Cornhuskers down the stretch last year. I am of the belief that that Calandria will get the job. He has the most starts, which, like I've said in so many of these videos this offseason, is the main thing you should look for if you're getting a quarterback out of the portal. But like I said, Latif already has starting experience with the current football program. The entire coaching staff is still there on the offensive side, at least. So he's going to be more familiar with the program, with the scheme in general. But Calandria is obviously going to be the more developed overall as a player. Started off his career a bit shaky at Virginia, but gets put into that Dan Mullen system that I am personally a big fan of. I think is very, very underrated. Immediately looks very improved in that pro spread style offense. And overall, he's a borderline elite athlete, big playmaker outside of the pocket. I would say modest as a passer, not going to live up to the Dylan Raiola expectations that you might have saw in years past for Nebraska, but he's another one of these guys who's going to lower his shoulder, fight for extra yards, and I think Nebraska has needed that. So for these two, I am once again going to go good. I think Calandria raises the floor for this Nebraska offense, but doesn't send it into the stratosphere. And after him, it is actually a bit controversial. It is Aiden Childs, now of Northwestern, formerly of Oregon State and Michigan State. And this is a guy who everyone has kind of thought would break out at some point in the past 2 seasons. Didn't really happen this year, just 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns and 8 starts for the Spartans this year. He has battled injury, which has played an impact on his role with the Spartans, but still looked a bit underdeveloped, and he transfers, of course, to Northwestern under David Braun. With him to Northwestern, he brings 20 career starts. I think he's overall very similar to Anthony Calandria, honestly. Has a lot of untapped potential as a passer, I think, but overall was a bit turnover prone in his time with the Spartans. And unfortunately for him, the move to Northwestern doesn't exactly inspire me for his play specifically at quarterback. I think he's going to be utilized more as a runner in that system. Northwestern, of course, isn't known for their elite quarterback development, so I think this is a good move for Northwestern. But if you're expecting Aiden Childs to break out into a elite player this year, I am very, very hesitant. I think his numbers will stay relatively low this year. I honestly think with him being turnover prone, with him being in an unfriendly quarterback system, I'm going to go mid, unfortunately, for Aiden Childs. Might seem a bit harsh, but like I said, nothing really points to him having a breakout season at Northwestern, in my opinion. And after him, it is none other than Julian Sand, and I don't even think I really have to say anything. I'm going elite for Mr. Sand, but to be safe, I will elaborate. He is a redshirt sophomore last year. His redshirt freshman season started all 14 games for the Buckeyes, a nation best 77% completion percentage, just unheard of. 3,600 yards, 32 touchdowns, Heisman finalist, actually made the trip to New York, not just Heisman contender, literal Heisman finalist. Elite accuracy, very efficient as a quarterback, which is also a product of the system that was at Ohio State that is now not there. But I still think he is one of the best quarterbacks in the country next year. Of course, will take him adjusting to the new system, but if anything, I think the new system will cater to him more than force him to be something that he is not. And with that, of course, still rocking with him at elite. I personally think he will be one of the best quarterbacks in the country once again this year. And after him, wouldn't you know, it is Dante Moore. Everybody thought he was going to go to the draft this year. He doesn't. He stays at Oregon. And this is yet another one that I don't even think I have to explain. One of the best quarterbacks last year. I know down the stretch it ended a little funky with him kind of blowing it a little bit against Indiana, but I mean, Indiana was an absolute meteor last year. I don't think anybody was going to stop that team. Structurally speaking, like mechanically speaking, as a quarterback, he's probably my favorite overall in the country. I think he probably should have been the #1 overall quarterback taken in this year's draft. I know a lot of people said Fernando Mendoza was going to be the #1 quarterback taken regardless. I think he mechanically is a lot better than Fernando Mendoza. Might be a hot take. I don't think it's a hot take at all. Going into the 2027 draft cycle, I think he should once again be the #1 quarterback taken off the board. Elite arm talent, elite accuracy, everything you can ask for from a quarterback. There are some questions about his ability to read defenses, but I think with another year at Oregon, he should be able to get better in that department. Last year, 3,700 total yards, 32 touchdowns, and once again, easily an elite quarterback. I don't think I need to say anything more. Probably ends up being a Heisman candidate once again this year. And after him, what do you know? Back-to-back banger quarterbacks, formerly of Iowa State, obviously. One of the most tenured quarterbacks in football. It seems like he's been in college football for 7 years at this point. 38 career starts. In those starts, 9,700 yards, 83 total touchdowns. Absolutely obscene numbers. I don't think it really gets better than that overall. But unlike the past couple guys, he's not hyper efficient as a passer. He's yet another quarterback quarterback who you like mainly as an RPO guy. He's going to hurt you with his legs. Very dynamic, great athlete, great playmaker, especially inside the red zone as a runner. They used him at Iowa State a lot in that regard, very, very efficiently so. But once again, I think he is a system quarterback. Now, he's probably the best system quarterback in all of college football. I think that is a good sign for Penn State next year. I am going to go great for Rocco Beck. Don't think he will have quite the numbers to end up as a Heisman candidate, but very well could impact that Penn State offense to get them towards the top of the conference this year. And after him, after 3 banger quarterbacks in a row, we come back down to earth with Ryan Brown, the Purdue starting quarterback from last year. 9 total starts in his career. He competed with Malachi Singleton, formerly of Arkansas, last year for the job, and he won it, of course, was the primary starter all year for Purdue last year. He had a sub 60% completion percentage, 2,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Got solid usage as a runner as well, but don't think he will be super effective as a passer outside of being a raw playmaker in the RPO game. Not super impressed with Purdue all around. They get some good additions in the transfer portal, but if they end up making a jump overall as a team, I don't think it will because Ryan Brown is their starting quarterback. I am once again going to go mid. Could have a slight boost in terms of production numbers next year, but not super high on him overall as a quarterback. And after him, another very, very interesting one. It is Dylan Lonergan of Rutgers, and he actually reminds me of Rutgers' last quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis. If you know his story, he started at Minnesota, then transferred to Rutgers and really was able to level up his ability as a passer in that system. And now we have Mr. Lonergan, who started last year at Boston College, was formerly a recruit at Alabama, very sought after recruit on top of that, still has potential yet to be unlocked, which ironically in Rutgers' system I think is very underrated in terms of pure passing output. We just saw it with Kaliakmanis. I think we could see it again with Dylan Lonergan. I think he has been underutilized as a runner at Boston College. Don't expect him to be utilized that much at Rutgers, but could see them factor that in. I think that would be a massive upgrade for his game overall. But overall, I think the move from Boston College to Rutgers will help him out. I am going to go good, actually. I can see where a lot of people would put him probably in mid. I think he is a step above that. And if Rutgers gets their ducks in a row on defense, I think he could help lead them to a bowl game once again in 2026. And after him, another controversial one. Not gonna go over the history with this guy. If you know, you know. It is Nico Iamaleava. Now, he took a step back in terms of production from 2024 to 2025, which is pretty obvious. If you remember, he took the jump from Tennessee to UCLA. I think everybody saw that one coming. We've heard how talented this guy is for years now, but now Bob Chesney takes over at UCLA. His offensive system is going to be a lot more quarterback friendly, as we just saw with Alonzo Barnett, now of UCF, formerly of James Madison, where of course Bob Chesney just was. And I think Nico Iamaleava could slot directly into that role that Alonzo Barnett left off in that system. I think he is very underrated as a mobile quarterback, will benefit from that RPO style, spread option, pro spread-ish style offense. I am going to go good. I think I probably said the same thing last year and he ended up being closer to mid than good in all honesty. But I think with the shift from passer in 2024 to being a quarterback that's more physical, able to have an impact in the run game, will help him out a ton now in 2026 in a system that is going to directly benefit him in that aspect. And next, it is none other than USC's Jaden Maiava. Really tough for this one. I think you could easily put him at great or elite, honestly. If he takes a step up and polishes his game to that next level, easily could end up in the elite tier in my opinion. One of the better quarterbacks overall in the Big Ten last year. And he was another one of those guys who was a short-term Heisman candidate at points last year, never really took the lead, but definitely was in those kind of conversations. But what will be most interesting for a guy like Maiava, who is once again hyper accurate, has a ton of arm talent, has a very good mechanical foundation for his game. My question is, how much will it affect his production now that Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, his top 2 wide receivers, 2 of the best wide receivers in all of college football, are no longer with the USC Trojans? I know they bring in a ton of talent. They could be able to replace those guys in terms of star talent, but in terms of raw production, does Jaden Maiava take a step back now that his 2 leading targets are no longer on the team? I think it is very possible, which is why I am leaning just great for Jaden Maiava for now. And after him, the controversy just does not end in the Big Ten. It is Demond Williams Jr. of Washington. Obviously an elite playmaker, an elite passer, but this one one is particularly tricky because if you've been following college football over the past month and a half, 2 months, you notice that he tried to get out of Washington, probably end up going to LSU, but we never really got full details on who was trying to poach him away. And then Washington sues him, says you are contractually obligated to play for us. So he withdraws from the transfer portal, of course, because that's how contracts work. And now he is once again slated to be the Washington Huskies starter in 2026. If we block out all of that mess, I think he could end up being an elite Heisman contender in college football next year. Just in terms of raw output, he was very elite last year, 3,600 yards, 31 total touchdowns. But I have to imagine if you're a quarterback who has been forced to play for a team that you might not want to play for, it's going to have an impact on your production for next season. I know he reaffirmed his commitment, but a lot of that is probably just PR talk. I am not sure how exactly he is going to work out there. Definitely going to be a very interesting storyline going into next season. I am going to keep him at great just because as a talent, it is hard to deny how good Damon Williams Jr. is, and I'm just going to leave it at that. No more talk about contracts in college football. I just cannot stand that. Let's move on to Colton Joseph. Great name, by the way, Mr. Colton. He was one of my personal favorite quarterbacks in this transfer portal cycle just because he had a huge impact, was essentially 2/3 of the Old Dominion offense last year. That statistically speaking was a top 20 offense overall. Another elite pro spread RPO heavy quarterback in this transfer portal cycle and in college football overall. Last season, 3,600 total yards, 34 total touchdowns. Very effective in his system, which I think Luke Fickell is taking notes on. I think they should use him exactly the way he was used at Old Dominion. And when we're talking about quarterbacks, anytime you have over 1,000 rushing yards and over 10 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback, that is always super impressive. I think that is very notable for how borderline elite he is as a raw talent. There is plenty for him to work on in terms of reading defenses. I think he might have trouble as a passer in the Big Ten, but overall as a playmaker and an athlete, one of my favorite players overall in this transfer portal cycle. Like I said, I think Luke Fickell has needed a guy like Colton Joseph and desperately so far in his stint at Wisconsin. Definitely a guy who's going to lower his shoulder, fight for extra yards, and extend drives in any possible way that he can. I think Wisconsin improves next year, but I don't think he necessarily lights it up as a passer. I'm going to stick with good for Colton Joseph. And that is the list. To go back over it, our elite quarterbacks in the Big Ten are Julian Sayin and Dante Moore. Our great quarterbacks, Indiana's Josh Hoover, Bryce Underwood, Rocco Becht, Jaden Mayava, and Damon Williams. In the good tier, we have Malik Washington, Drake Lindsey, Calandria/Latif for Nebraska, Dylan Lonergan, Nico Iamaleava, and Colton Joseph. And our mid quarterbacks, Caton Hauser of Illinois, Ryan Hecklinski of Iowa, the Michigan State duo of Alicio and Cam Fancher, former Michigan State quarterback Aiden Childs, and Ryan Brown of Purdue. Let me know what you think of this list down in the comments below. What did I get right? What would you change about it? Go ahead and drop that comment. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. It helps me out a lot, and I will see you in the next video.